a beautiful summer's day. I thought I'd go along the river to talk about a book. Well, actually it's a short story. Part of a collection by Jorge Borges. Mangrove swamp to the left here. This is part of what's called Lucy Moore Park, and it faces onto the Mahu River. Some nice trees here. So the book is the library of Babel by Borges. It's a collection of his short stories. It's Funes, his memory. I can't remember having read it before. I've read some of his short stories in other places. He's well known for them. He's Argentinian, or was. And Funes, obviously, is a Spanish Argentinian name. And it's set in Argentina at the end of the 19th century. And it's a guy who wanders around in and out of Buenos Aires. He goes to a place, if I remember, Fray Bentos, and he's on a horse and he meets this young lad who's walking nearby, and because he's on a wall looking down at him, he has this memory instilled into his mind of that young boy. So that when, sometime later, he hears that the boy fell off a horse and was permanently crippled and now lies prone in a bed, can never move, that memory comes back and, almost like trauma, wants to find out a bit more about the lad. It really has an effect on him. The lad's called Funes. Hears that he likes reading, so he sends him a copy of Latin and goes to visit him a few days later, and is amazed to find out that in that time he has read the book, or had the book read to him, and he now can speak Latin. The furthest you can go on this little trail, and here is the river. And the sound of birds. Those birds were loud. This is the book. Really enjoying it. Ireneo Funes had this tragic accident and he's laying there on a pallet. And the narrator, he's looking back many years later, so in a way it is about the memory of Ireneo because Ireneo dies. And it's set in the 1880s, 1890s. But it's also about Funes's memory, because when he fell off the horse, although tragic, there was an unforeseen circumstance. He's always laying there. He said, Funes never stirred from his cot, his eyes fixed on the fig tree behind the house or on a spider web. And the book that he had been sent was Pliny, the Naturalis Historia, which talks about memory, fun enough. The author, Borges, goes into that book. He tells us the cases of the prodigious memory catalogued Cyrus, for instance, the king of Persia, who supposedly had thousands and thousands of troops but could remember the name of each and every one. Well, obviously there was less to learn back then. Mithridates Eupator, who meted out justice in the 22 languages of the kingdoms in which he was in charge of, so he could speak 22 languages, remember them. There was Simonides, who was supposedly the inventor of the art of memory, and Metrodonus, who was able faithfully to repeat what he had learned, though it was only once. So when the boy had been bucked off the horse and it hit his head, he gains such a prodigious memory. And he wasn't, in a way, sad that he was made paraplegic all his life. He said that before then, and that rainy afternoon, he had been what every man was, blind, deaf, befuddled, and virtually devoid of memory. He had lived, he said, For 19 years, as though in a dream, he looked without seeing, heard without listening, forgot everything or virtually everything. But when he came to, the present was so rich, so clear that it was almost unbearable, as were the oldest and even his most trivial memories. So something happened. But it's an interesting, challenging thing to hear. And could trigger some people, as all these kind of writings can. I can't remember who it was, but there was an old Greek philosopher who famously blinded himself so that he could see reality better, because he came to believe that the world around him wasn't real. And the only way to see the real world is not to see it. So he effectively states that we see the world, but we don't see it. Only when you're removed from it do you really get to see or understand how things really are. He said his immobility was a small price to pay, now that his perception and his memory were perfect. And this perfection of memory isn't exactly what you would think. So I'm just going to go back. He talks about that when he came to, the present was rich, so clear. I remember, I think it was the English playwright Dennis Potter. If I remember correctly, he died of cancer. And when he had been given by the doctor that prognosis and he didn't have long to live, he said in an interview that when he left the office, he saw all these trees and all the leaves. And for the first time in his life, everything seemed to stand out in pure, pristine vision. Everything was clearer, much more vibrant of colour. He said every day he woke up and everything was like a new revelation. He was making every day count. But let's talk about Funes and his memory. Borges now writes that when we see something, and he mentions wine glasses on a table, he says, we could see 3 wine glasses and leave it at that. But Funes, he saw every grape that had been pressed into the wine and all the stalks and tendrils of his vineyard. That can't be memory. That is imagination there. Because every visual image was linked to muscular sensations, thermal sensations, and so on. He was able to reconstruct every daydream that he had ever had. This is Ireneo saying, I myself alone have more memories than all mankind since the world began. This very short story goes on to talk about the nature of memory. What is it to have such a memory? And the fact that how come most of us don't? We forget things. We don't retain everything. So could you remember at the age of 19 all the presents you got? Age of 9? Chances are no. So why is that? And it's not just his memory. Funes can see things. So imagine he's looking at this wall. He can see the quiet advance of corruption, of moth decay, of tooth decay, of weariness, the progression of humidity. So he won't be seeing things like... His perception, in other words, was radically altered. He was solitary, lucid spectator of a multiform, momentaneous, is that even a word? Momentaneous and almost unbearably precise world. It was hard for him to sleep, because to sleep means he took his mind from the world. And really what I wanted to talk about is this last bit. He had effortlessly learned English, French, Portuguese and Latin with that book. But, and this is the narrator, I suspect nevertheless that he was not very good at thinking. To think is to ignore or forget. To forget differences, to generalize, to abstract. In the teeming world of Ireneo Funes, there was nothing but particulars. This is the beauty of these short stories. So succinct, so precise, and yet so deep. Or could you live in a world, or could you live with a memory that remembers everything? I don't think you could. because what would it serve? We forget things because they may become innate. So a small child burns the finger on a flame, say candle flame, won't do it again. But do they need that specific memory of that specific candle? That's actually talked about here, but they're using a dog. Funes was virtually incapable of general Platonic ideas. Not only was it difficult for him to see that the generic symbol dog took in all the dissimilar individuals of all shapes and sizes, it irritated him that the dog of 3:14 in the afternoon, seen in profile, should be indicated by the same noun as the dog of 3:15, seen frontally. We have a very limited vocabulary that doesn't state specific things in detail. I think there's a book called Smiller's Taste of Snow or something like that. So in the Inuit culture, and a Canadian would be able to tell me if I'm correct here, in the Inuit culture they have so many words for snow. Snow that may be falling, snow that's laid on the ground a while, discoloured snow, hopefully not yellow, and so on. But generally outside of that culture, there isn't many words for snow. It's just snowing, snow on the ground, slurry, slush perhaps. And you won't get that so many words, and there certainly won't be as many words in, say, Berber culture. Likewise, in Berber culture, they'll probably have myriad words to describe sand and rocks in the desert, but Inuit won't have those words. And Wittgenstein talks a lot about language games, how we agree on the sound coming from our mouth to describe something, but they tend to be very generic, very simple. That irritated Ireneo, because there was not specific names. Why? Because we can't remember them all. But he could. So, how come then we have intelligence? What is intelligence then if we don't remember anything? Because if, according to the last piece, that this is Borges now, I think, writing as the narrator, that despite having all these memories, he was not very good at thinking. You've got to forget. You need to generalize and abstract. So isn't it ironic that all these rigid structures of thought, all these schools of philosophy that say it has to be this and this and this, and also logic, is based on the brute fact that we as humans don't work that way. We plainly forget more than we remember. And as you get older, you forget more. It's just a fascinating topic. And it's, again, this is the of such a small piece, that it could do this. It could get you thinking for long periods, longer than, say, if this book was the whole story, probably won't be as effective. With short stories, they're getting rid of the chaff. They're just getting straight to the point. So this is just to say, great book. Definitely worth a read. Ta-ta for now.